Hi, and welcome to this instructional video for the Systematic Multiverse Analysis Registration Tool. As multiverse analysis aims to reduce the uncertainty introduced by data processing and analytical variation, it's important that the decision-making process to construct the multiverse is documented transparently. This app was developed to support this process across multiple scientific disciplines. In this video, we will walk through the app step by step, and I'll explain how it works so that you can document your multiverse analysis in a systematic and transparent way. Upon opening the app, you will land at the welcome page. Here you'll find some background information on why this app may be useful for you and its intended purpose. You'll see along the top panel that the app is organised into two overarching stages of multiverse construction. Multiverse 1.0 provides a stepwise procedure to define a defensible multiverse of pipelines, whereas Multiverse 2.0 guides you through refining Multiverse 1.0 into what has been termed a principled multiverse, where only pipelines assessed as equivalent in a specific criterion are included in the multiverse. In this video, we're going to walk through each of these sections, and we'll start with Multiverse 1.0. Opening this section, we can see that 4 steps appear, and we'll start with the first step, which is 1A, specify the scope. Multiple defensible options can arise at decision nodes throughout the entire workflow, including measurement, data processing, model specification, and estimation methods. And a multiverse analysis can be focused on reporting robustness to one of these stages in particular, such as data processing, or they can span multiple of these stages, for example, reporting robustness to data processing and model specification. Here you should select the stages of your workflow where you will be considering the possibility of alternative defensible options for your research question, study design, and data. If you're unsure what each of these labels represent, you can hover over the question mark for a definition. It may be the case that your multiverse analysis has a narrower focus, reporting robustness to only one or two specific decision nodes within one of these stages. When your scope doesn't fit exactly to these categories, you can provide further information in the text boxes provided. For example, if I want to assess robustness of an effect to outlier definition and outlier handling in particular, and not the entire data processing stage, I would select data processing because these decision nodes fall within the data processing stage, and specify in the text box that I intend to focus on 2 decision nodes within this category in particular. I would write here outlier definition, outlier handling. Next, we should specify which method we will use to gather all of the potentially defensible options that are available to us within our specified scope. You may look for potential defensible options in the published literature, from your own expertise or in collaboration with other experts, through crowdsourcing or through another method. The method used can influence the pool of options that you sample and later consider for defensibility, so this should be documented. Here you can select one or more options that you will use, or if you intend to take a different approach that's not included here, select Other and specify in the text box. For this example, we can select Expertise, and we can specify Single Expert. And this makes it clear the space from which decision nodes and options were extracted to be considered for defensibility. Scrolling down, we're asked to list all decision nodes and options that are possible within the specified scope using the specified method. Here it doesn't matter whether or not you believe that the decision nodes and options are defensible, just that they exist in the field and they appear within your search. You'll classify defensibility at the next step, but the reader of your multiverse analysis should be able to see which decision nodes and options were considered for defensibility, including those that were considered but deemed indefensible. Then it's clear whether any options that are not included in your final reported multiverse analysis were either overlooked or were actually considered but evaluated as indefensible for the context of your multiverse analysis for a reason that you'll later specify. This can help identify potential bias in the final multiverse, and it enhances transparency in the decision-making procedure. Node here refers to a decision node in the pipeline. If we click on it to open it up, then we can assign a label to that node. Using our example, this would be outlier detection. Clear and concise labeling is essential for the following steps. Then you should add all options that are available within this decision node regardless of defensibility. So you would write here, for example, plus minus 3 standard deviations from the group mean. Add option each time you wish to add another option. And for simplicity for our example, I will just label the rest 1B, 1C, 1D. But you should provide clear and concise names that describe what is done to the data, like in the first example here. Once you've finished adding all of the options for the specified decision node, you should click on Done, and then, if we scroll up, you will see that a visualization appears here on the right-hand side of the window as an individual network. And this helps you to keep track of what has or has not been added already to your Multiverse 1.0. We can add another node by clicking Add Node, open it up in the same way by clicking on Node 2, name the node, so here this would be Outlier Handling, add option. Again, for simplicity, I will just add to A, to B, to C. Click Done, scroll up, and we'll see this has now been added to our multiverse here. This process is repeated until you have entered all potential options for all potential decision nodes within your specified scope. If there will be a decision node in your pipeline that does not have more than one option, you should still enter it here, adding the node and the one option so that it can be added to the pipelines in a later step. Once you've finished, check the figure, check everything is there, and then move on to the next step. The next step is 1B, Define Defensibility. Here, all decision nodes that you created in the previous step are displayed along the left side of the window. If you click on a node, you will see all of the options assigned to that node. Again, you will see the visualization of each node and its options as individual networks. Within this step of the procedure, you should go through each decision node and option and classify it as either defensible or indefensible. Each option at each decision node is to be considered independently for defensibility. For example, perhaps an option is defensible in some scenarios, such as depending on other options selected earlier in the pipeline. However, if the option is defensible in any scenario for your specific multiverse, you classify it as defensible, because we will define defensible combinations of options in the next step. You can classify a node or option as defensible or indefensible by using the radio buttons underneath it. Once classified, the node or option is automatically color-coded green for defensible or red for indefensible in the visualization. This provides you with an easy-to-digest overview of your decisions, and you can always go back and correct any mistakes that you may have made. And now we can go through here and set the options to defensible or indefensible, and when indefensible, we can provide a justification in the respective text box so that readers of your multiverse analysis can evaluate and understand the decision that you've made, and it provides transparency for the options that were omitted. Here you would add the specific reason for why you believe this option at this decision node is always indefensible for your multiverse analysis. We go through and repeat this process for all decision nodes and all options. You can then check that all have been color-coded in the figure and that your classifications are as you intended them to be and no mistakes have been made. Once complete, you can proceed to the next step, and all of the nodes and options that are classified as defensible here will automatically be saved and carried forward. The next step is 1C, Create Defensible Pipelines. Here you can create all defensible pipelines from the defensible decision nodes and options. Start by selecting New Pipeline, and this will present Pipeline 1. When you click on Pipeline 1, all of your defensible decision nodes and options will be displayed in a box on the left-hand side, and an empty canvas will be displayed on the right-hand side. Taking one pipeline at a time, you should drag and drop the decision nodes and options into this pipeline box, first selecting the decision node, followed by the option at that node. The node name should always precede the option because option labels could be fitting for more than one node. This way we are clear which decision node is to be executed at this location in the sequence. You'll notice that only the nodes and options classified as defensible appear in this step. So we see that 1C and 2B are missing here because we marked them as indefensible in the previous step. You can follow the construction of your pipeline visually on the right-hand side of the window, and you can change the sequence of the options by dragging and dropping within the canvas box. Once your pipeline is complete, click on Save Pipeline, and this pipeline will be saved. You can return to it later if you wish to amend it, and by clicking Save Pipeline again, it will overwrite what constitutes that pipeline. When you're ready to create the next pipeline, click New Pipeline, and Pipeline 2 will appear. Click on Pipeline 2 and repeat the procedure. This time, a different option at decision node 2 may be defensively combined with the same option at decision node 1. This process is repeated until you have all defensible pipelines from your decision node and options constructed. They do not automatically generate because it's not always the case that the Cartesian product of all options across nodes are defensible, and the order in the sequence that options are placed can vary defensively. However, to save time, it's possible to copy and paste chunks from previous pipelines to new pipelines. This is especially helpful for long pipelines of multiple decision nodes where the same string of options and nodes can be repeated with minor changes to the pipeline. The application saves all pipelines and carries them forward to the next step automatically. At Step 1D, your Multiverse 1.0, a drop-down menu is provided that lists all pipelines constructed in the previous step. Selecting a pipeline from the list will display the sequence of options in that pipeline as both a table and as a figure. This allows you to review the completeness of your pipeline. You can, if you wish, check all of the pipelines that you've constructed. When you're ready to proceed, scroll down to export all pipeline information. Clicking on Download Pre-Processing Documentation will generate a PDF file summarizing all of the information that you've entered over all of the steps. Clicking on Download Construction will generate a zip file containing Excel spreadsheets documenting the same information organized between the steps. To ensure compatibility with Step 2A of Multiverse 2.0, the folder structure and the file names must remain unchanged. When you've exported your documentation, Multiverse 1.0 is complete. Congratulations! If you wish to revise your multiverse into a principled multiverse, scroll back up, make a cup of tea, and select Multiverse 2.0. Once you open Multiverse 2.0, you will immediately see that there are two steps to the process. We'll walk through both of these, starting with Step 2A, Criterion for Equivalence. As an overview, Multiverse 2.0 refines the set of defensible pipelines identified in Multiverse 1.0 into a principled multiverse, based on a user-defined equivalence criterion and threshold, and a data-driven assessment performed on a subset of participants. This involves computing the Multiverse 1.0 on a reduced sample to minimize computational demands, with the output being the equivalence criterion rather than the effect of interest that is later estimated to answer your research question. Those pipelines that produce a value of the equivalence criterion within the specified threshold are classified as equivalent, while those that produce a value outside of the threshold are classified as non-equivalent. Only pipelines classified as equivalent are included in the principled multiverse. The first step to achieve this is to specify the 3 decisions that define equivalence. First, the equivalence criterion should be specified. The previous literature suggests an equivalence in terms of validity, testing for the same effect, or estimating the effect with comparable precision. But the criterion is not limited to these. Here you should specify the exact metric that you will compute across all of Multiverse 1.0 pipelines to assess equivalence. For the sake of this example, we can say that we will use the standardized measurement error. Second, you should specify the threshold for equivalence on this criterion. This could be a point threshold where all values above or below a point are considered equivalent, or it could be an interval of values. You should define here what best fits your equivalence criterion, and you should define it here before assessing your pipelines. For this example, we can say that all pipelines that result in a standardized measurement error of less than 0.2 will be deemed equivalent. You should select the criterion and threshold that makes the most sense for your multiverse analysis. Third, you should specify the proportion of the sample of participants that this assessment will be computed on. Perhaps you have a small multiverse, so the computational demands are feasible. However, perhaps you have a fairly large multiverse analysis, and running the full multiverse on the full sample of participants is not practical. Here you can specify the proportion of the sample that the equivalence assessment will be performed on. For this example, we can say 10%. We imagine a nice high-powered experiment with a large sample size. At this stage, you should now go to your preferred statistical analysis software and compute the equivalence assessment that you have specified here, obtaining one value for each pipeline. It's helpful to keep the pipeline indices that are used within the app the same in the statistical software to avoid confusion. Once you've computed this equivalence assessment, return to the app, because then you're ready to complete the next part, which is to enter the results for each pipeline. Here you will see a drop-down list of all pipelines constructed in Multiverse 1.0. Selecting one pipeline at a time, review the table and the visualization to check that it matches the pipeline for which you are about to enter the result. Once you've checked that it matches, enter the value resulting from this pipeline in the text box provided, and based on whether or not it is within or outside of the threshold that you defined earlier, classify it as type E for equivalent or type N for non-equivalent. So let's say that pipeline 1 resulted in an SME of 0.18. We type here 0.18, and because this value is below our predefined threshold, we would select type E to classify this pipeline as equivalent. We move through all pipelines doing the same thing. We'll check pipeline 2 does indeed match pipeline 2 from the statistical software. We would enter the result for this pipeline. We would check, does this fall within our specified threshold? It does, so we select type E to mark it as equivalent. For our example, finally, we would get to pipeline 3. We would check that all of the specifications match, and then we would enter here the result, and in this case we can see that it actually exceeds our threshold for equivalence. In this scenario, we would select type N to set it as non-equivalent. All responses are saved automatically, so when you're finished, you can scroll up and move on to the next step. Now we've reached the final step, 2B, your principled multiverse. Here you can view all of the pipelines that were classed as equivalent, your principled multiverse of pipelines. To extract the decisions, results, and final principled multiverse, scroll down and click Download your Principal Multiverse PDF. This, as well as the documentation downloaded at the start of Multiverse 1.0, can be uploaded as part of your pre-registration or as supplementary material to your published multiverse analysis. And that brings us to the end of the walkthrough. If you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions for future development, then we encourage you to reach out to either me or one of the co-authors via email or contribute to the GitHub repository. We would like to thank the DFG Special Priority Programme MetaRep for funding the project, and thank you for listening. We hope that the systematic multiverse analysis registration tool helps you to define your multiverse and contributes to a transparent and reproducible science.